Welcome to the How HR Leaders Change the World podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Crossley, and each week we explore how the work of HR leaders is also creating positive social change, contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Goals which the world's companies are increasingly understanding the urgency of achieving and investing in the action required. If you'd like clear, actionable ideas for how you can use the power of your role to affect change in your company, you're in the right place. Following a corporate upbringing, I founded the social enterprise From Babies with Love. We provide services to HR leaders, and through this work, I realised that HR professionals and social entrepreneurs are working in the same areas, albeit in different ways. So we created this podcast to share knowledge on steps we can take through the work of HR. In my opinion, if you're an HR professional, you are also a change maker. And this podcast will provide you with examples of how. By sharing the successes of some of the world's most inspiring HR leaders, you can frame your work in the context of positive change, implement brilliant ideas, and feel absolutely wonderful about doing so. A very warm welcome to Jessica Peacock, who is Global Inclusion and Wellbeing Lead at Ørsted. It's wonderful to have you here, Jessica, and I'm particularly interested to hear from you today, having seen that Ørsted has been ranked the world's #1 for the world's most sustainable energy company. So please do introduce Ørsted and yourself for all our listeners today.
Of course, and thank you so much for having me today as well. It's really exciting to be here. So essentially, we're so proud at Ørsted to have this huge kind of purpose intertwined into everything we do, which is absolutely sustainability. So Ørsted began as an oil and gas company and developed through a series of, as I'm sure anyone would say, risky moves to invest fully in green energy. So that happened over an 8-year period. We set goals to be the most sustainable organization, thinking about all kinds of different things from biodiversity all the way through to how we can create that green energy, how we can create that world that runs entirely on green energy. And we've surpassed our own targets and our own goals. And we have a huge commitment to sustainability that you can really feel throughout the organization. My role in that is really interesting. So as Ørsted was growing, there wasn't a huge focus on the inclusion and well-being side of things. And that's really grown over the past kind of year or so. And I've been so honored to be part of the team that's kind of driving that huge part of sustainability, the social and human part of sustainability through diversity and inclusion as well as well-being, which has been fantastic.
Brilliant. And I think it's going to be so interesting to hear you talk about the work you're doing in those areas, but in the context of an organisation that exists to improve the sustainability of the way we live and connect them. I'm really interested in how that works and how you're putting that into practice. So may I lead us into our 5 questions? The first of which is, as an HR leader whose influence creates social change, what do you feel has been your most impactful action to date?
So when I was having a little think about the word impact, I really struggle. And that sounds really strange because I should be extremely positive in this moment. So I think for me, the word impact is like a challenging one because I'm so passionate. Like with diversity and inclusion work, we can really focus on how it feels rather than what it does. And for me, there's this huge and very fascinating part of diversity and inclusion where we've done the same thing for a long time with very little impact. So there are 2 aspects to me with the word impact. The first thing with impact is definitely that I love, and I've become really passionate about evidence and research-based practice, which means that I'm constantly thinking about impact and measuring it and worrying about it and wondering if my diversity and inclusion work is up to scratch with that. And secondly, it's been a really interesting time. So at the moment, I'm about to talk about football, which I feel like is probably a bit off-piste for us already, but there we go. The Euro 2020, but 2021. You know what I'm talking about? Football. European football is happening. And England at the moment are doing much better than they have historically for a really long time. And one of the things that happened was 10 years ago, we realized we didn't have enough local talent. We realized that we were really great at bringing people in, spotting talent in other places and bringing it in, but we realized that we weren't growing our own talent. And that was 10 years ago. And it's taken 10 years in some ways to realize that impact. And I think in a lot of ways, diversity and inclusion and some of the work I do has that element to it as well. Sometimes I can't immediately see the impact I've had or the impact of the work that I've done. And I think in itself, that makes it a really interesting one. And even actually, for me, one of the biggest impacts, I guess, that I feel kind of have been able to make that social change is to change that conversation in diversity and inclusion, to shift it from what feels good to what does good. And I think that's started to have a really big kind of impact. It doesn't mean that things that we've done before, it doesn't mean that some of that best practice isn't best practice. It means that we need to question that and move forward. So we really look at having a test, learn, adapt approach. And I think that has a big impact on us, and does start to kind of create that impactful action, that we question everything that we've done and we kind of pick it apart and reinvent it and reevaluate it all the time. It makes me a very annoying colleague, but I think it is probably what has the most impact there, especially in our business, that approach, that test, learn, adapt approach. And I hope to see impact. I hope in 10 years' time I get to look back and I get to see that impact too. So, yeah.
Those are such interesting thoughts, just questioning the starting point as well. And I was wondering if you already have an example that you're most proud of, where you went through that process and questioned how it had been done, arguably very well, but how it just questioned it anyway and reflected on it, and made a change that you feel is going to create better measurable evidence. Or if you have one that you dream about that is just really challenging at the minute that you're working on and trying to figure it out, it would be lovely to hear one or two examples from you.
Absolutely. So one of the biggest issues for us at the moment, or one of the things that we're really looking at how we can challenge and change, is the perception of what sustainability means. So and for us, that means, so at the moment when we say sustainability, a lot of us will immediately think about perhaps plastic straws, or making sure that we're recycling, or making sure that we're kind of checking with our clothing brands to make sure that they're ethical. We might be thinking some of those things. But actually, when we think about sustainability as a whole and as an organization, the specific way that we are changing what sustainability means. So educating everyone that sustainability has a huge and global kind of approach to it. And actually, environmental is just one of 4 pillars of sustainability. The environmental impact is just one of the 4. And how can we, as one of the world's most sustainable companies, how can we embrace and push forward some of those things? So really specifically, that means that when we're in our sustainability team meetings, the inclusion and wellbeing team, we're part of those meetings. We are implementing a series of different things, and that means also working with our suppliers. So working on those relationships with suppliers to develop that really clear stance on what we expect when it comes to, first of all, of course, energy. So the energy part of that is the baseline. It's what we've been asking for 8 years. We're there. If you were to go to one of our sites and speak to a technician that works on a wind turbine, and you were to ask them our purpose, they would absolutely be able to tell you that we were working towards that world that runs entirely on green energy. And actually, it's been about reshaping that. So the thing that I'm hoping will have the biggest impact is we've worked on, we have a series of must-win battles, we call them, which is very dramatic, but I guess we're working towards them. We want to create that drive towards them that existed for the green energy piece. And one of those is creating an inclusive work environment for everyone. And there are some really specific things behind that. And one of them is global growth. So one of those is really that mobility piece. And what we want to do, and one of the things I'm hoping will have that impact, is move away from the idea of expats. So at the moment we have lots of colleagues who go into certain places, and it generally means white colleagues going into other places. And for us, we've really tried to turn that on its head. We've really tried to say, actually, mobility means everyone. So at the moment for us, that means Taiwanese colleagues coming into our UK offices to really learn and understand more. And for us to learn from them. They are all very qualified engineers. And it's fascinating to see some of those differences. And shifting what mobility means is a huge thing for us. And I'm hoping it will have a strong impact in the future, that we are an organisation that no matter what country you're in, you can shift and move and get those opportunities. And I think it has a huge impact. Yeah.
There are brilliant examples. Thank you, Jess. And while you were talking, there were so many links I was making in my mind. And one of them was that recently we had the Chief People Officer of the Lego Group as a guest on the podcast. And he is also the C-suite lead for sustainability at the Lego Group. And so, like you were saying about how, as an inclusion, you're a global inclusion wellbeing lead, and you join the meetings of the sustainability team. And at the Lego Group, that is happening too under his leadership. And so I just thought, well, should that be a default? Should everybody listening that is working on an area of inclusion be getting an invitation to the meetings of the sustainability teams, which my sense is commonly they're separate, but arguably shouldn't be. And if they could just fit that into their enormous workload, should they add that in?
Just fit it in. I always think it's so fascinating, because obviously one of the things that I really try and do is create accountability for colleagues that aren't HR professionals, because there's so much that HR professionals are expected to do, so many hats that HR leaders are supposed to wear. So it's really fun for me right now to be thinking, oh, well, luckily I can say, yes, they should. We all should be joining those meetings, because I don't have to go back and talk to an HR VP who's saying, Jess, I can't do any more. Make the leader do this, please. But I do think that, yes, it's a huge, especially because sustainability is something that's definitely becoming a talent magnet. So being a greener organization, being an organization that takes into account sustainability holistically, I think it is starting to become something that people are desiring and researching before they join a company. And if we're missing big chunks of sustainability, and historically the energy sector, so green energy that obviously we're part of, it is a masculine industry. And therefore the parts of sustainability that have been focused on have been the parts that we would define as those more in kind of speech marks, masculine areas, which is like the environment. Whereas we've got so many other important and exciting parts of sustainability that are extremely valuable and are in some cases life and death as well. So I would definitely say, especially for HR leaders, if there is that sustainability element in your organization, if that is something that's being focused on, for us as well, and this is a very selfish perspective, I guess, but for me as well, embedding some of that diversity and inclusion work into sustainability has been really valuable to get that buy-in in the type of organization that we've historically been. Because if you say the word diversity, it doesn't always go down well. People aren't always pleased to see me. I know that sounds very strange, but people aren't always pleased to see me. So embedding it into something that we already believe in, that's so vital for us, it has been extremely valuable, and will continue to be, because we are, of course, we're working on it. I'm not saying we've got it, but yes, it's a really valuable aspect of what we do.
Yeah, it was so interesting to hear you describe gender imbalance in sustainability teams that you've noted historically, because of course we call the Earth Mother Earth. She's feminine. So what? How on earth has that come about? And then I was thinking about, you mentioned before the pillars of sustainability in your framework that you use at Ørsted, and there are 3 others outside of the environment. And like, so for example, for an HR professional, this is just off the top of my head, sustainable wages, for an inclusive world that works is like, right there as a number one thing to look at, to connect the two, as I'm saying. But let me move on to question 2, because I could talk to you for hours about all these things and we haven't got that time. So now just to think a bit more broadly about the energy sector and what you see as the most exciting opportunity for HR to change the world.
And I think I can speak from a very lucky place in some ways, and I'm hoping that I can kind of distill it a little bit more from I'm really lucky isn't my organisation nice. But basically, as an organisation, we do have that true purpose to become the world's leading green energy major, and to be able to make that positive impact on biodiversity by kind of 2030. And as I'm able to be part of that movement, it really does give me a lot of opportunities. The energy sector itself is slightly different, and we're moving. The sector as a whole is absolutely moving towards green energy, which gives us, especially in HR, it gives us that hook. It gives us a hook to say, "Wow, yes, you're totally right. Environment is so important. That's a really interesting part of sustainability. Shall we explore some of these other ideas? Shall we explore some of the more people-centered aspects of sustainability that maybe weren't included in our first definition of becoming a more green energy company? Should we start looking at social and human sustainability, which are absolutely in there? If you're looking at kind of the bucket as an HR leader of things that are relevant to you or are important to your role, they are absolutely kind of our problem. And you've got the human part, which essentially is the idea that the communities we live and work in should be sustainable. So that means, do we benefit the areas that we're based in, or do we take away from them? On the most basic level, that's kind of what we're looking at there. And I think that is a huge opportunity to change everything. An example being, in the UK, we have sites in some of the poorest areas, so with the areas with the lowest kind of socioeconomic statuses in the UK, and having our offices there and working specifically to engage with local people, local apprenticeships, bringing local people in, creating resources and change in those areas is a huge thing that we've been doing specifically to look at that kind of social sustainability. And my role there is first of all, there's an amazing team that are local, that understand what's happening, but also we are able to bring in that diversity and create inclusion in some ways, because we have people from many different kind of backgrounds in an area where we've got almost like a ready to go talent pool of people with high unemployment, and we can embed that and create a better kind of area, a better kind of space for those people to work in. And it's really, really powerful. And then we've got kind of the other, a slightly more I'm not going to say serious, but the slightly more intense part of what that looks like. And that's things like, how do we kind of create that social justice? How do we create that social justice throughout the process, which is things like making sure that at no point during our entire supply chain are there any forms of child or forced labour. And that can be really difficult because we have some very specific and rare kind of parts that we need to create these amazing turbines and these amazing things. And it's a constant piece of work for us. And actually that does mean, from my perspective, that means connecting and understanding local cultural values to make sure that we're speaking to and equipping our suppliers and our colleagues with the right skills to be able to make those decisions and those choices. And it's hugely powerful, and it's really important. And it really kind of, when we think about both human and social sustainability, it encompasses the whole of my role as an inclusion and wellbeing lead, but it also encompasses so many other aspects. And it really does create that kind of, it gives that platform. And I think it is and it's such an exciting opportunity for us to say, oh, all of those things that were kind of to the side that maybe weren't as super important to you before, look, they're part of sustainability that you've just said you want to achieve on. Like, let's do this. Like, I've got some sustainability I'd like to talk to you about. And I think it's a really important issue for us. And we can embed some of the language of sustainability in our HR work without having to take on like additional duties. It's about sometimes just shifting the way that we see or speak about something. So community outreach, or our talent and engagement, or some aspects of diversity, some of our policies and processes. And I think that's a really important, and it has a huge chance to bring those people along with the sustainability journey, and truly mean sustainability when we say sustainability, not just environmental sustainability.
How HR Leaders Change the World is brought to you by From Babies with Love, and this episode is sponsored by our very own parental leave gift service. We help solve the challenge of connecting with colleagues across parental leave and in returning to work, contributing to talent retention and so too gender balanced strategy. From Babies with Love donates 100% of its profits to orphaned and abandoned children. Your beautiful, sustainably sourced From Babies with Love gifts come with the story of how your company is also helping a less fortunate child, creating meaningful engagement. We transform spend that so often already takes place on flowers or products that don't have the Sustainable Development Goals at their heart. We transform that spend to become a consistent, inclusive and strategic part of your working parents programme. Ask us to tell you more at frombabieswithlove.org. Make an impact at a defining moment. Yeah, I love the question that you asked, that again, the starting point of it being, do we benefit more than we take? And I was thinking about how, imagine if every company not only asked that question, but also measured it. You were talking a lot about how difficult it can be to measure so many elements of the work that you do. And my background is I'm an accountant, and I would love the bottom line to be net benefit, not net profit. Net benefit may well include net profit, but imagine how wonderful that would be. And I also really love what you were saying about benefit versus taking, because I have a little bugbear about the phrase that I see a lot on my LinkedIn feed when big companies use the phrase we're giving back. Because my question is, well, why are you taking in the first place? You know, you're not a toddler. You know, goodness sake. And I'm going to have to work on articulating that argument, because it's just a phrase and a use of language that when you think about it, is, well, no wonder we're not living sustainably, because it's all the take, as if we're 2-year-olds, you know. So I'm going to have to find more professional language for that. And, on my lawn. Yeah, it's what I was thinking of as you were describing the hugely exciting opportunity you just described there for everyone in HR, the ways of thinking and connecting dots between what may be in big companies completely different teams. And is there an area of social or environmental injustice that you are personally particularly passionate about, and that your role at Ørsted is giving you a chance to contribute to change towards that?
I think it's been so kind of interesting that I'm able to, some of the things that I'm really passionate about, I'm able to work in an organisation that shares some of those values. And actually, I feel like when you have a role around inclusion and well-being, part of everything that I do kind of is to advocate for all of that kind of, to advocate for that kind of social justice element of where we're at and what we're looking to do. And I think our organisation, so Ørsted, was built on innovation. So I'm in a position that I can kind of advocate for some of that diversity and inclusion work. But what's so strange about it, and when I was reflecting on the idea of what is my passion amongst all of this fantastic work that I get to do and all of the amazing people that I get to advocate for, and it was difficult because obviously for me, when I think about diversity and inclusion and I think about well-being, so much of it isn't about me. It's about everyone else. And I remember once, when you kind of do those small interviews and you might fill in a survey, and one of them was like, how inspirational are you? How inspiring are you? And I was being interviewed, and the lady said to me, she said, "Oh, this is really interesting, but you don't think you're inspiring?" And I was like, "Oh, no. It's the other people it's everyone else that's inspiring. It's my job to show how inspiring they are." And actually, it's taken me a while to find that place that I'm super passionate about. But I think for me personally, especially when I'm thinking maybe outside of some of the key things that I would say just relate to my work naturally. I think for me, one of the really important things has been I was late diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. So I have ADHD, and it's been so important for me to be able to advocate for some of those changes for neurodiverse colleagues. Being diagnosed later in life, and that intersecting also with being a woman. So I was a high achiever at school, and I was also a girl, which meant I was never going to get diagnosed with ADHD. But this intersection, it's been so interesting for me to look at in the workplace, because as you've probably seen today, trying to follow my thought patterns at times. My ADHD means I can interrupt, I can speak really loudly and bluntly, I can change topics without realizing, so my brain can take me to a new place without me kind of finishing where I'm at. But actually, a lot of some of those behaviours, they seem fine if you're, in the pub or you're having a lovely coffee, but actually they go against that really strange idea, or the idea of professionalism. And professionalism is my least favourite word. And I think over time, especially when I've been working with other colleagues, the word professionalism is such a discriminatory phrase, not only for me as somebody who's neurodiverse, but for so many people. And it's used almost as a bit of a weapon. Professional doesn't mean kind. It doesn't mean inclusive. It doesn't mean any of the words that we kind of use and we value in HR and also in sustainability. It is a very limited and specific way to make certain people feel comfortable. And it doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for so many people, especially people from like diverse backgrounds and all kinds of different places. In fact, it doesn't work for any of us. But just before I joined Ørsted, there'd been a survey, and it asked colleagues, do they feel that they can be authentic? The classic question with inclusion, do they feel they can be authentic at work? Okay. And our business at the time, I think, was 80%, 70-something% white men who were mainly Danish. And we had nearly 50% of people at that point telling us they didn't feel they could be authentic at work. And for me, it tells me a few things. It tells me that perhaps professionalism is being used to control colleagues. And then how can we create that authenticity with this word professional kind of hanging over us? And who does it serve? That's the question that I began to ask myself. And I feel so much like, especially for me, my role has given me the chance to start to tear down, to think about how can we even speak about our social and human sustainability? How can we even begin to talk about diversity and inclusion if we have this phrase, this word that kind of takes over from all of those other fantastic things that we want to achieve and do? So at Ørsted, we've really been working on, and for me, it's an opportunity I've only had through working in this business that's so passionate about innovation. But to take away the word professional, whenever I see the word professional in any aspect of my work, we take it out. We talk much more about communication styles, working styles. We've been taking out the word professional when we do things like redesign our offices and spaces for the future. We've been looking at, okay, so let's think about working styles, communication styles, rather than where's the place that we can be most professional? And actually that starts to build something so much more powerful, and it goes beyond kind of a specific area. And asking that question and removing the word professional from our organizational kind of dialogue has been really interesting. We're working at the moment on creating a different phrase. So we're asking colleagues, we're working on the organization, asking colleagues, what do we mean instead of professional? What are the words that we mean instead of professional? And that's been really powerful, and we're hoping it will embed that psychological safety. For us, we're so close to the beginning of that journey, but it's a really fantastic opportunity, and I'm hoping that it's something that we can really push forward through the organisation and beyond. Professional is such a damaging word.
Yes, this is absolutely fascinating. And I'm conscious that I just earlier used the word professional myself, and I did it in a way that was I was demeaning my own point, which was a perfectly valid point about the language of giving and taking, and how I think there's something inherently, the starting point is wrong and we need to reframe that, which is a perfectly valid point. Yeah, I use that, but I'm talking about toddlers and that's not professional. No, yeah, I love it. You've made me question myself, and I'm going to keep that thought with me. And I would love when you and your colleagues, if you are able to share the phrasing and the new language that you come up with, I'd love for you to let me know, and for us to share with everybody listening, because I think that's I haven't had a discussion like this before. So I think it's really innovative and fresh thinking, and really important to the building blocks of inclusivity, as you say. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing also your personal experience with us. That's very much appreciated. And you mentioned one example there of how you're doing a piece of work in asking colleagues about the language that you use at Ørsted. I was wondering if there are any other examples you'd like to share about how in your role you are best creating a more equitable and inclusive environment in ways that are driving business goals for Ørsted.
Absolutely. So it's been a really fascinating time to join a green energy organisation. So originally, when Ørsted started entering a few markets as a green energy provider, there weren't competitors. There was a huge lack of realistic competition. Of course there were some, but there have been some really interesting shifts for us now that we are competing, and we're competing with some organizations that are extremely well established, have had that long-term global success. And one of our main goals is to be that global organization. We are intrinsically, at this point, still a Danish company, but we have to be able to compete on a global level. And I think that these two things are so intrinsically linked with that inclusive environment. So, I mean, firstly, we want to keep what makes our Danish kind of heritage, our Danish culture, amazing. So one of the things that's been so helpful to us historically, and one of the things that I love about the business is we are very consensus driven. So we make decisions by gaining consensus. There's very little hierarchy. There's very little there's not much space between leaders. So that helps us to a huge extent. I'm super lucky that I've had many conversations with people all across our organization. And when I was trying to come up with examples of my ADHD to share, some of the, when you get diagnosed, basically they have to see that it has an impact on your life. And they said to me, "Oh, can you think of an example?" And I was sitting there of when you've interrupted someone, and I was sitting there and I was thinking, I reflected really quickly on the fact that I'd been in a meeting with our CEO a couple of days prior, and I'd interrupted him twice. And actually, because of the fact that we have that consensus-driven organization, he wouldn't even remember that I'd done it. He would have been so comfortable to we were just sharing ideas and challenging each other. It had been really valuable, but I'd interrupted several times. And those things, those parts, that consensus-driven, that flat hierarchy part of what we do, we've been really keen to pull that forward because we want to bring that into our global growth. But I think what's so important is that we remember and we've melded. And one of the things that my work is about is taking the parts that really work in our culture to help us with our global growth, but also bringing us into some of those other areas, bringing together some of those different cultures and backgrounds. We have an office in North America that's growing all the time. We just won another huge kind of contract in New Jersey, and bringing together how we talk about diversity and inclusion and what our inclusive goals are in the US and where we're at in Denmark is a fascinating kind of position to be in. And I think that when we're looking at bringing in that talent, being a competitor and remaining a competitor, as Ørsted, we have to focus on inclusion. We don't have the opportunity, diversity and inclusion has that huge role to play. My generation, the generation below mine, now there's another generation below mine. It's fine. They're looking for that culture. They're looking for that culture full of authenticity. And that's a place where we can be competitive. So although we don't always have solutions, so I can't say that I sit here with all of the solutions, in my position, one of the things that I really get to do to bring about that more equitable and inclusive environment is I get to spend time finding those solutions, seeking out what really works and has impact. And every time we open up a process, we find something that isn't working for all colleagues, and we create a space where colleagues can kind of find their own solutions to support that global growth. We really do start to see that competitive edge. We've got to, and I think it's something that more organizations are feeling and seeing. Our edge can be our culture, and there's a huge role for me to be able to play in that and to create that more inclusive environment. And in my position, it looks like a few things. It looks like framing diversity and inclusion as absolutely a way to deliver our business goals. It's so refreshing to kind of even have the question asked. It's so refreshing to even have the question asked, how does that work? So our culture really does have to have that competitive edge, and we are a very white and male organization. So creating that authenticity and finding spaces to create that authenticity is vital. And even for us, what's been really important is defining our must-win battles. So for us to remain competitive, what are our must-win battles? And there were 5 of them. And one of those was around that equitable and inclusive environment. And just being able to put it out there to say, this is something that's important, just to link business goals to inclusion. It's still something that we're working on at Ørsted. We still need to make sure that they're together. It is something so vital for HR leaders to be a part of. But as we've already recognised in this podcast, in our conversation today, we've already had that kind of understanding that most of our HR leaders are at the absolute top of their capacity. They've got so many things to focus on. And I think the really small thing that we can do, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about focusing on embedding inclusion, is that it becoming part of what we do rather than another thing on the table for leaders to discuss, another thing on the table to add in. It becoming part of the dialogue that we already have. And I think that does take time, but it's a really valuable kind of piece.
Thank you so much, Jess. And I'd like to ask now for just one more thing that you would like all HR leaders to add into that enormous work they have. if it was only one, literally everyone's too busy, no one's got time, you can only ask everybody to do one thing. And the one thing that you would get most excited about to make a positive change for the world, what would that one thing that you would like to see all HR leaders and all HR professionals do, what would that be?
I think you're going to know exactly what I'm about to say, so that's going to be lucky because we've already spoken so much, so I feel glad about this. But I feel it's lose the word professional from your dictionary in all situations. Find other words to describe the specific behaviours that you want to see. So if we are, the most basic example being when we talk about conduct, right? We might talk about professional behaviours and professional conduct. What do we actually want to see? Do we want to see kindness? Do we want to see listening? Do we want to see someone having healthy boundaries? What do we actually want to see? And use those words instead to help everyone, to move everyone forward, and also to take that word professional away and replace it with something that we can all understand. I think that's definitely that positive change from me.
Love it, Jess. It's absolutely fabulous thought to leave us on. Thank you so much for joining us today. I literally could have talked for several hours, but yeah, everyone will have finished walking the dog or finished the run or finished their morning coffee, whatever they're up to while they're listening to our episodes. So regrettably, I will say goodbye to you now, but thank you so much again for joining us on How HR Leaders Change the World.
Thank you so much. It's been a huge pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of How HR Leaders Change the World. Thank you for tuning in. If you have a moment to leave a review, a 5-star one please, that would be a huge help to achieving our goal to reach more of your peers, so we can all contribute to further and faster positive change. For your copy of the show notes, head to frombabieswithlove.org, where you can also join the How HR Leaders Change the World mailing list, and make sure you don't miss out on future episodes and bonus materials. And for harnessing the power of your role to create positive social change, I'm sending you a jumping up in the air virtual high five. See you next time on How HR Leaders Change the World.